We have heard today in many different parts of communication, especially in the morning, a chance to hear a thoughtful lecture of Gabriel Michalich about transformations within neoliberal capitalism and the imposition of the entrepreneurial role of artists. Through such reflections, we easily become aware of the relations between political systems and the amount of freedom given to participants in social but also cultural life. Radical right ideology every now and then activates again through demonstrations of power, protests, rallies, attacks, but also in more sublime ways inside political decision-making. So relation to art was always wider, social and political strategies, at the same time positioning artists as self-determined creators of extra value. In rather turbulent decades, this positioning varied, but nowadays we can see that there is urgent need to redefine capability of artists to understand their own role in society, value of their work as a process, context in which they should engage on wider social and political scene. So the question with which we start a presentation of Dominique Willaert is there enough potential to step forward, explore new models and new potential roles in the politically transforming societies? So Dominique, welcome. You can start now your presentation.
Yes, wow, what a question. Okay, so I'm speaking from Belgium and I will explain a little bit an evolution of the Belgian art scene. I will start with a kind of historical overview, and then in the second half of my presentation I will share a quite inspiring and hopeful evolution in the field of arts. And is it like this that people can intervene and ask some questions, or is it only I that will speak?
At the end of your presentation, we will open a discussion, and
okay.
Everyone who would like to pose a question can write it in chat.
Okay. People can see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Okay, I'm going to start. In Belgium, we experienced a supportive period between the end of the 80s until 2010. Art and culture was subsidized and deployed as part of a vibrant democracy. This means that there was a lot of public funding and there was a political support from almost all democratic parties. It was used as part of vibrant democracy, but also as a kind of calling card for countries and continents. You know, Belgium is famous of its chocolates and beers, but also with the arts. The result was a boom of world tours of dance companies, painters, visual artists, theater companies. Maybe you know Rosas, Anna Theresia de Keersmaker, the painter Luc Tuymans, the choreograph Alain Platel, Neat Company, Michael Borremans. They were opening up the world for us young artists. It was also part of the democratic opposition to the far-right. We have a long history of strong far-right movements and political parties. And it started at 1991. It was our first Black Sunday. Then we had far-right party who gained almost 25% of the votes. But art, not only the community arts, but art in general, were a bit used as part of this democratic opposition. This is one of the visuals that the artists are making in their magazines to make clear that our jobs, our work is not a curiosum, but an essential job. This is a photo of one of the recent manifestations. It was made in the first lockdown. The still stand in Ghent, one of the cities in Belgium, but everywhere in Belgium, artists went up to the streets because of the lockdown. Many lost their jobs and incomes. I will come on this later. The many different actions in public space of the arts. So we experienced a very good period of almost 2 decades, but then we experienced a turnaround. I guess it's a little bit parallel to other European countries. What happened in Belgium, it started with soft cuts as part of a neoliberal agenda, and these cuts, they are the first weapon that policymakers are using. In a second step, our policymakers developed a new ideological argumentation. They are using language like, we need to protect our cultural heritage. Artists are spoiling our money. We must develop our own cultural canon. And in a third step, they combined hard cuts and personal and direct attacks from the far right on artists and cultural institutions. Oh, excuse me. This is, we published a book. I want to mention that now there is a kind of economical logic. If you can receive public funding, then you need to shine. So it must be brilliant. All the productions needs to be shine, and then you have a kind of economical value that they want to transform in public funding. The impact, the impact of this turnaround is that there is a reduction of public funding and a growth of private initiatives without any form of democratic control. There is a kind of new parallel system that big companies are investing money. They start to buy buildings, and in those buildings they are presenting exhibitions, but they are private. So they are making the choices of which kind of artists can have a place in their buildings. There is the creation of a very hostile climate towards artists and cultural institutions. They are using a lot the social media, but also in the public domain, they create a kind of hostile climate. And there are direct political intervention on democratic processes. So in the boards of many institutions, they drop their policymakers. After 2 decades of a very fine period for the arts in Belgium, then we experienced this turnaround, and nowadays we can speak about a hegemonic shift into the field of the arts. We experienced from a positive and offensive identity towards a very defensive and almost lost position. Now I'm speaking of 2 years ago. This is our Flemish Prime Minister. What is new, before we had a Minister of Culture. Now he is the General President of the Flemish community, and he is also the Minister of Culture. But he has almost no time to develop a good and deep policy. It's almost a year ago, there started huge protests, not only against the soft cuts, but especially about the turnaround in the climate, in the discourse that they are using. This is a photo of Brussels, the Beurschoper, where at a Thursday evening, 3,000 artists came to Brussels to create open spaces, public debates in many small groups about the question which kind of strategies we can develop towards this policy. That's a photo of inside the building. What is new and hopeful is that the younger generation, almost all of them were there in Brussels. After this turnaround, what were the first reactions? In the beginning, defeat reigns. In the beginning, there was panic, there was a division, and there was a kind of atmosphere. Let's save what we can save. The social democracy in our country, like in France and other European countries, has lost its power and his support towards the arts. So 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, there was a kind of vacuum. But then, and this will be the hopeful part of my presentation, they start the resistance a bit since 2014, but an acceleration the last 2 years. What is interesting to share with you is that there is a coalition between newborn civil rights movements. We have a new one, a strong one, a hart boven hart. It means a heart above a heart. Yeah. So a newborn civil rights movement, plus a lot of individual artists who were before never well organized, and small institutions took the lead. And important, the support of the unions. I think this is interesting to share. In Belgium, 60% of the workers and servants are members of a union. So they have still a strong impact in negotiations and in the public debate. Voila, a next photo of the way people were gathering in many different spaces. What were the strategies of the individual artists and the small institutions? They took really the lead. They organized horizontal open meetings with a new kind of leadership, less patriarchal. Yeah, a bunch of young, strong women took the lead and are still taking the lead. They are creating new and strong images. We invested a lot of time and also money in creating aesthetically strong images. There were a lot of manifestations at the parliament. I think in the history of Belgium, it was the first time that artists went to parliament and they joined the discussions between the policymakers in the parliament. So they were attending parliamentary debates with well-known artists and young students. And they organized since 2014 a yearly parade in the streets of Brussels. And I'm using the term prefiguration. The things they are hoping for, they try to create images that are prefiguring their hopes and their new ideas about how to organize society, how to organize the arts. There were new coalitions the last 2-3 years in Belgium with artists, with climate activists, Black Lives Matter, and decolonization movements, and the diverse LGBTQ+ community. This is also recent, and I think in history the first time that you see such an inspiring new coalitions. That's an image of artists who were in the parliament. I was there also a couple of times. It was interesting to experience a lot of policy makers went nervous because they were not used at the kind of public debate with artists in the parliament. That's a famous actress. It's a kind of joke with the guards. The effects, State of the Arts was born. It was mentioned in the beginning of my lecture. Indeed, they have a very inspiring website. State of the Arts started as an open and new democratic vehicle. There is more voice and power for artists. This is really an important shift in Belgium. Before, it were the big institutions who took the word and who negotiated. Since a year and a half, it are the artists themselves, so many individual artists who took their voice. There is a kind of deinstitutionalization. It's obvious there is less power for the patriarchal structures. There is a kind of radicalization of strategies and actions, and there is a mass mobilization of art students. There is a growing impact in the public domain, in media, and also
medijima, također i na strani kreatora politika, i doneta je odluka da se oni pomenuti rezovi povuku.
Some images of the streets in Brussels. I like it a lot, the whole set of new images that they produced. Since a year, there is a kind of, after the threats and the turn around, there is a kind of new legitimization. There is a much stronger position of the artists in different fields. Visual arts, audiovisual arts, dancers, theater makers. They are much less divided, and there is a lesser categorically approach. So today there is a remarkable interdisciplinarity. Very important, there is a reconnection with the society as a whole. I call it, there is a kind of holistic approach. What we experienced is that a lot of artists went into public space in smaller cities, and they started to work in order to approach many different people. There are no new dogmas, but a kind of vulnerable scan of opportunities. Maybe this is a little bit strange, but yeah, I'm very surprised and overwhelmed about this whole new attitude of young people. They are really vulnerable. They can discuss and debate in a much more open way than I guess in my generation. And they scan opportunities. I don't know if you use this term, but they are working on the not yet. So they try to make a prefiguration of what can be possible. I like it a lot. Again, a picture of young people gathering and discussing in a very inspiring way. Do not only rely on your knowledge, dare to other systems coexist and change yours. Since a year and a half, I experience a lot of new modes of production. There is a revival of collective workspaces and processes. One of them is South Park. It's a bunch of young people. I guess they are with 20 people, and it's kind of mix of visual artists, theater makers, dancers. And so they produce and create in a very collective way, and also in a more radical and free way. So, you know, the market is expect a lot of typical productions, and they try to make them free of expectations of the bigger institutions. So they are radical and more free. A lot of big institutions are starting to rethink themselves. There are a lot of exhibitions in new spaces, and often much related to civil society. They experienced and discovered that fear doesn't work, so they create an offensive attitude. And people start to negotiate. What do we have in common? So you see a lot of new coalitions and modes of production where you see a kind of, is it a good word? Hybridization of arts, of commons, repair cafes, thinking about climate change. There is a kind of repolitization. A lot of artists are discussing the depth of democracy, the sort of democracy and they wish. So after a huge crisis, there is a kind of total new atmosphere in the way young artists behave, create, produce, and present. I can give later some examples. I think this is an image of something that I mentioned. The artists are thinking how they can create strong images that create a kind of impact in the public domain. That's a picture that illustrates a bit how people enter public space. It's a kind of how can you enter a shopping street with images, with artistic interventions, with common people. What do we have in common nowadays? Really, institutions are starting to share their spaces and equipment. There is a kind of change. We see lesser productions in the classical spaces. More and more we see presentations in public space. The new collectives are creating new networks between each other, also with a kind of worldwide and international perspective. So it's not like this that are people closing themselves up in a Flemish or Belgian context. What is quite new is that artists from the diaspora, the artists with a migration background, are taking serious at last, not because they are different, but because some of them are really good artists. I mentioned two examples, Cine Maximilian. It's a kind of cinema, a kind of new cinema institution that is traveling around Belgium with movies from all over the world. And Globe Aroma is situated in Brussels. They invite painters from all over the world with a migration background who can work and produce, but also who can have exhibitions in a very qualitative way. It's an interesting organization, Globe Aroma. There are new collaborations between art institutions, civil rights movements, and climate activists. I'm giving one example of an interesting artist. Her name is Maria Lucia Cruz Correa. She's from Portugal, and she developed a kin institute. And she's working since 5 years about, you have the classical civil rights, and now she wants to create a new institution all over Europe with ecological rights. In our constitutions, we have civil rights and other rights, but there are almost no ecological rights. We have it already in the constitution in Ecuador, but not in Europe. And as an artist now, she wants to involve and incorporate ecological rights in the institution. That's an example of a very interesting new collaboration between different types of institutions. I don't know if you are aware of this, but since last year, we experienced a period of more than a year without a government. That was interesting because we experienced that people started to govern themselves. There were a lot of jokes, but there is a kind of new municipalism. I call it often a kind, not communism, but commonism. So because we experienced a long period of not having a government, people experienced in how can we govern ourselves in a very creative and inspiring way. But again, coalitions between artists, art institutions, ecological movements, and the classical unions. The artists started with a fund because of the first lockdown. Many artists lost their jobs and incomes, and after, I guess, a week, there was a kind of emergency fund, and it was quite successful. They succeeded in finding money, but they convinced also the government to create more funding to support the artists. Not the art institutions in the first place, but the individual artists. what are the new perspectives that I experience? There is a younger generation with a new and a radical awareness of the destructive impact of capitalism, neoliberalism. And I mention it, they dare to name it. So in a lot of discussions, people are using this kind of language. We experience neoliberalism, capitalism, and they name it. Although COVID is provoking a huge precarization, many people lost their jobs and incomes, artists and institutions try to reorganize themselves with solidarity at the horizon. There are a lot of new initiatives, and almost every time they are using the term solidarity. And there is a growing awareness of the need of an inclusive class struggle. We experienced a bit, I call it the collateral damage of the United States, the academics, the identity politics. And of course, I'm very aware of the importance of this, but I experienced it more as a kind of, it created a division. And if people are using the terms like capitalism and neoliberalism, and they are making an analysis of what the impact is of this, then they create a kind of inclusive class struggle. Voila. It's kind of an example of crowdfunding to create a new documentary made about the work of Jan Blommaert. He's a kind of linguist, and it was a kind of documentary that researched the relation between language, power, and struggle. He's one of the inspiring intellectuals in Belgium who's working around this theme, and many youngsters are really inspired by him. Again, a picture of solidarity. A lot of events in many different Belgian cities. What are the new threats and what is the common goal? The precarious jobs and positions result in a closing of our imagination. So there is a kind of damage in the minds of many people, and especially young people. There is a patronage and private funding instead of public funding, and there is a kind of opportunism. It's interesting to join a company with big and a lot of money. We have in Europe a new Green Deal. I want to discuss this with you. So the European policymakers, they are using this big new Green Deal, but what about the arts? So I'm a bit concerned, and I think a good strategy can be that from many different European countries, we try to start with writing letters to the European Parliament. The far right is maybe better organized than the democratic people and movements. So it's an invitation to you all. I think we need to organize ourselves in better ways, not only on a national, but especially on the European level, to share different kinds of knowledges, strategies, and modes of production and presentation. This is a kind of wish that I want to share with you and discuss after my presentation. Voila. It was this. I don't hear you.
Thank you on your presentation. It was very inspirative and interesting, and I believe that many things are not known about the situation in Belgium. I hope now that there will be questions from our listeners. And I would like to ask you for the beginning, what is your perception of European Union in a whole as a structure that also should take care through European policy, as you mentioned, about artists, and not only exclusively about a new Green Deal? Do you think that there could be possible ways to communicate European instances?
Well, let's start from my position. I'm living in a Western European country, and so I'm very aware of my privileged position. But what I experience is that in those Western European countries, many people are able and willing to create a solidarity towards the Eastern European countries and the South, so the Southern European countries. So if I speak with people, colleagues and young people, their identity is not a kind of national identity. They are not proud to be Belgian, and maybe this is because we are a small country, but people are interested in other European countries, and they developed, maybe for the first time in history, a real European identity. If I observe young Belgian artists, they are really willing to meet other people from other countries. But I think it's really important. We are not so well organized, so we are often busy with our own projects and institutions. I'm inviting you to develop a kind of strategy where we can reach the European policymakers. I did it with some colleagues. We started to write emails and letters to our European policymakers, so the people from the social democratic parties and the green parties and social and Christian Democrats, to ask, can we create a kind of debate and dialogue of the position of the arts in Europe? If we don't do this, then a lot of money will go to the new Green Deal and also to agriculture. So we need to make stronger disposition, and we need to develop a strong strategy in how we can reach them and opening a debate. And we have some classical institutions who are doing this, but we are not with enough people. So I'm inviting you to create more and better strategies towards this subject.
I would have one more question right now. That is the state of arts. I have visited the website, and I would like to ask you, on part of all listeners of this presentation, this website is in fact national or it is international? What would be the channel of communication if there would be possibility to establish from this moment on some wider cooperation? For example, from Serbia and from Belgium and from Finland and other countries. Do you think State of Arts is a kind of website that could be a channel for that? Or you believe that there should be some other channel opened for this kind of international developing of strategies?
Well, it's a kind of double answer. The website of States of the Arts is inspiring and can be used from other countries as a kind of European vehicle. But if I'm looking back in history, more than 100 years ago, people were traveling around in Europe. If you are looking back to the socialist history, people were taking the train to Geneva, to Switzerland, to Berlin. So we need to see each other and we need to meet each other. And Danilo from Serbia was one of our guests last year. With a little money, we organized an alternative European summit. It was a year ago, November, in Ghent. We invited more than 100 people from all over Europe to share our different knowledges and strategies. It was amazing how people were happy with those meetings. And the result is that we create a kind of new informal network in this way. So we have our digital ways, but I really believe in the importance of meeting each other. And you can create a kind of solidarity between this. So also in finding funding, some bigger institutions can use their professionals to help in finding European money to organize those kind of meetings. yes, I really believe that we need to meet each other more often than now.
I would like to invite Timo Maki, because I see that you have a remark about organizations that could help EU level lobbying.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to take more time for myself at the moment, but my notion was just that I completely agree that the arts in general should be much more active and we should unionize more. In some countries, artists have strong unions, and in some countries, very weak or almost non-existent unions. But artists benefit from organizing as unions more than almost anybody else in the so-called precariat, I think. And nowadays, EU offers us lots of leverage in cultural politics. I could offer a simple example from the realm of literature, that in Finland some years ago, writers managed to bring about a new legislation by which writers now get monetary compensation for library loans of their books. It means that before this, if my books were loaned from a public library, I got no compensation. But now I get, I think, 27 cents per loan of each time somebody borrows my book. And this is a kind of good kind of trickle effect that the users of the library system don't notice anything, but the writers notice surprisingly big new form of income. And this was only possible because of EU. There was a EU legislation that demanded member states to apply this kind of legislation on a national level. And after 10 years of lobbying in Finland, we finally were able to force the state of Finland to actually put this EU level order into practice in Finland. These kind of promising examples are, I think, have great potential. We should try that more.
Could you just give us a few words about the organizations that you mentioned here?
Just that these are just examples. I mentioned International Artists Association because we are now mainly dealing with visual arts in this conference, and I'm a member of the executive committee of this organization. And then this Culture Action Europe is affiliated with us, and I think they are quite successful in the EU Commission and Parliament lobbying. But I'm sure there are numerous others, but these are the first that come to my mind.
Thank you. I would like to invite Magdalena Liskova to give us your impression of discussion since now.
Yes, thank you very much. I am actually also talking to you from Belgium, from Brussels, as I work in one of the one of only the 3 federal culture institutions, the Center for Fine Arts Beaux-Arts. And I think Dominique gave you a very good insight into the recent history of the support to culture in Belgium on maybe rather the Flemish side of the country, because as you might know, in Belgium, culture is the competence of the regions of the Flemish and the Wallonian region. Then there is the region of Brussels, and with the Beaux-Arts we have a specific role of being a federal culture institution. So this is bringing a different perspective of the also what comes to the subsidies and the support, because of course we are kind of representing all the parties, and we try with also our program as a big institution, something that Dominique was mentioning, to act as kind of we feel our responsibility in helping artists, to providing them the space, and also setting the artistic dialogue into the international level, working a lot with the European artists and bringing the Belgian artists in dialogue with the international arts field. So of course, whenever there were any activities done that Dominique was mentioning by the culture field, we were supporting these activities, because we are a bit outside this, but at the same time very much involved with all the artists at the same time. And what maybe I could mention a bit on the European advocacy part, because with Beaux-Arts, we are a very active member of number of these European networks and platforms. And I think that this is a very important part of our work. Actually, Culture Action Europe, that was mentioned by Maki, is based in our building, and we work with them very closely. And it is indeed one of the organizations that gathers the voice of all art fields, multidisciplinary, from different field of culture and art, and are very good in the lobby or in the influence of the conditions of artists from many perspectives, also cultural workers and people active in the field. And we work with them closely on commenting on policy papers and all different statements. But what Maki mentioned as well is the importance of other networks that are focused on in different fields, that are multiple at the European level. And we could see also during the Corona crisis that everyone was trying to make very strong statements and have their members sign letters and addressing the politicians, addressing the commission, addressing MEPs, a bit of kind of not always synchronized way. So indeed, I think that sometimes we should try to be more coordinated in this advocacy actions, and cooperate across all the artistic fields even more, because the voice would be stronger, and in the end, what we need for art and the conditions for artists, cultural workers, employment rules, and all the things that could be influenced are very similar, or if not the same, for all different artistic fields. So yeah, that would be my comment for the moment.
Thank you, Magdalena. I would like to add that Dominique's lecture resonated in many ways with the situation in Serbia. The Fund of Solidarity was founded, and maybe in later discussion today you will have chance to hear more about it. And the Artist Union of Serbia also was awakened and restructured in a certain way, growing awareness of the position of artists. But what was interesting on the other side in Dominique's lecture was this remark about closing imagination. How important you believe that is this new kind of reality and on which front we can say that it manifests for the original somehow life of imagination of artists?
For me, this is the most crucial aspect, that the damage that neoliberalism is provoking is the closing of the imagination. The younger generation has a lot of more fear than us, than the older generation. You see it also in education. They try to cut all the kind of knowledge that open up our imagination. And so, but it's important if we want to reopen the imagination, also the political imagination of people, we need to develop more offensive strategies. I think this is our strength. Our biggest strength is our imagination in creating inspiring storytelling, but also images. And what I hope is that why can we not contact all EU members with the question to become an ambassador of the arts? So you have the formal institutions, but I want to be radical on this. I don't expect a lot of these classical institutions. It will come from more informal networks with new and radical imagination. It's a good experience with this group of people. How can we create a strategy in contacting all the EU members with the question, Mr. or Mrs., do you want to become an ambassador for the European arts scene? So, and this is my conclusion that I made in Belgium. It were the young people, the not institutionalized artists who took the lead and opened up the imagination in the minds of many people. So yes, I'm very straight in this. And the hope for me is laying in the informal and smaller networks and non-institutionalized networks.
We have a question here from Anja Obradovic, Hestia Gallery in Belgrade. If we turn only to EU level lobbying, how can we learn about and include artistic projects from places like Latin America, Africa, and Middle East?
Yeah, this is a very good question. But in Belgium, because we have a history of migration, 30% of the inhabitants have a migration background. All those people from Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East, and especially the artists, they are creating new perspectives. So today in Belgium, it is not a white perspective or not a kind of Eurocentric position. I'm influenced by all those people. I'm working on the floor with them. So they are already bringing in those new perspectives, especially from Latin America, the quite good period they experienced. There was a kind of left-wing movement in some Latin American countries. They developed strategies to resist capitalism. Let's say one example, the Zapatistas. They really had an impact. The struggles in Argentina. I'm really inviting you to organize more informal European summits where we come together, not to drink, yes, maybe late at night, but at day to share experiences and practices, and especially to develop new strategies. So you have one level of sharing knowledge that is coming right from the floor, but on a second level, and this is a more deep level, you can come together to develop strategies where we can learn from each other, how to learn to organize ourselves in a better way. And again, not from the big and classical institutional level, but more from the informal side.
I would like to invite Magdalena and Timo, if you would like to comment part of presentation where there was a mention of connection between ecology, green movement, and artists.
Yes, I will get back to this right away. I just wanted to briefly comment on the previous question with Latin America and other countries, MENA region, and actually the third countries from the EU. You know that also from it's something similar for us, as Dominique mentioned, in Belgium with the number of diaspora communities and really the very diverse public and society we have in Belgium, and especially in Brussels. We also work with many of them, and there is well, this is on the one hand on the creation side, but on the institutional one, which I understood that you didn't want to mention that much, but if you get to the EU lobbying level, there is of course the European External Action Service that has a very important part of activities in culture diplomacy of the European Union. And as Beaux-Arts, we've always been a member of the platform of the culture diplomacy platform, which is now called Culture Relations Platform. And there are many activities done, and also financial support provided in different calls in developing cooperations with exactly Latin America or other third countries that were mentioned in the chat comments. So I think one of the lobbies done could be also at the European level with this office. And of course there is always a space for every one of the people listening to us to check a bit more on this and get involved in these activities. So I just wanted to say that there is even at the European level, there is a structured platform how to reach to third countries. And then to your question to the sustainability or the Green Deal and or the discussion of the green culture, or is that right? Yeah.
Yes. Cooperation between green structures and artists.
Yes, I think that yes, it has always been present in creation among artists, a certain level of activism and maybe responsibility to the planet, and now it's even more present. I would say that something that was described as new connections between the civil society, artists, and also young people. It's really very 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 present in the creation. And I think most organizations, if they are not completely blind to what is happening, have to take steps towards more sustainable creation. Also ask themselves what their influence is. And this is the same what is happening at Beaux-Arts. We are also trying to reflect on how we work, how we create on all these questions. And there is a strong activism also connected to the artistic expressions. If we would go only to the Green Deal at the political level, or the discussion on what is now very much topic number one, the new European Bauhaus, of course, then we would have to, it would bring us to a very complex discussion on what the role of artists in this whole new approach is, how they can be involved and how they should be involved, and of course how their involvement should be kind of remunerated, or what would be the financial frameworks to work with the artists, because this is in the end what we come into. We need to create in a sustainable way. We need artists that always go a bit further and make us question everything we do, but at the same time we always need financial support to let them create. So it comes back to the topic of this discussion, and I see Dominique wants to react on what I said.
Yes, thank you, Magdalena, for sharing your knowledge and experience. I have an important question. This is the funding systems. They are in a very classical approach, and what I experienced today, I want to share a book. The title is Crisis of Imagination, Crisis of Power, Capitalism, Creativity and the Commons by Max Haven. I don't know if you know him. It inspired me a lot, and he made a kind of analysis how in Canada the art field reinvented themselves a bit. So what is the point and question? Artists are producing today in new ways, and the new ways of creating and presenting this doesn't match with the classical funding paths of the EU. So there is a kind of gap. You have a kind of bureaucratic approach and big institutionalized approach, and those many small collectives with often inter-European relations. It's very different. Do you know, for small companies, how difficult it is to receive European money? So you have a kind of trickle-down effect. The bigger you are, the more money you receive. And it is my critics against this kind of European funding. We need to rethink how can you receive money in a more organic way, or relating to those new modes of creation and presentation. Do you agree that there is a kind of huge gap in this?
If that is a question on me, I definitely agree. And then also with Beaux-Arts, as a big institution we feel our responsibility in involving smaller institutions and helping them with the bureaucracy and all the European support brings. It's whenever we for example, apply for European projects that we work with a lot, we always try to see, and the collaboration is done within the whole Europe, also with the third countries as well. We are trying to involve small institutions, and of course we work in the way that where we can help them and support them in reaching to this kind of financial frameworks, which are definitely not accessible to everyone. And me personally, I am Czech originally, and I can see the huge difference still between the countries that entered EU in the later stage, and where it's very difficult for, if I would say, for the Czech organizations, small ones, especially when all these transactions and the budgets are done in euro. With the Czech crown, it's still not possible for them to be competitive in that sense, and it's not, they cannot afford practically to, or only a few of them can afford to apply for such support. And yeah, like it's true that we still have to look into the ways how to make it more accessible and support those that for whom it's very difficult, or yeah, like to make sure that the money reaches also the artists themselves in the first place, and those that create, because this is the core of what we are trying to do, to create projects where the money is reaching the creators and the sector throughout the different fields, different cultural workers, different focuses they have. So I would agree, and there is still a way to go. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you on this discussion, and thank you again, Dominique, on your presentation, which really gave us insight. First of all, in the circumstances in Belgium, and I think it was very valuable to all our listeners on the conference. So thank you all.